Let's talk about semicolons. All right, semicolons is that one punctuation mark. It looks like a period with a comma right underneath it, and oftentimes it's used confusedly. So let's talk about the rules that rule when we use a semicolon. So the first one, and probably the most prolific use of it, is when you use it in place of a period to separate two independent clauses that aren't joined with a conjunction. Now the catch here is that if you use a semicolon to separate those two independent clauses, those two independent clauses have to be closely related. So you couldn't say, I'm going to the store, semicolon, then I went to bed. That doesn't really fit together. So you want to make sure the subjects are really super closely tied if you're going to split them with a semicolon. The nice part here is that this semicolon usage is a good way to fix run-on sentences if you have them. All right, you also can use semicolons to separate a list in which certain items in the list already use commas. So that's more of a clarification thing. So instead of using millions of commas in a sentence, you're going to separate it out and use the semicolons to provide that separation. And then finally, you use a semicolon before an adverb that joins two independent clauses to create that break. Here's one big trick. With the exception of semicolons in a list, either side of a semicolon should always be able to stand on its own. So it's not like a regular colon where you provide a list afterwards. If you look at either side of a semicolon, you've got to have words, in other words, sentences, that can stand by themselves. All right, let's take a look at some examples. I've got my father is an engineer, semicolon, my mother is a nurse. So we've got our semicolon here in the middle. This works because we've got two independent clauses. Either one can stand on its own, and the idea here is that these are really closely related. I'm telling you what my mom does, and I'm telling you what my dad does. All right, what about this one? My bucket list includes visiting London, England, Dublin, Ireland, and Honolulu, Hawaii. So this is one of those where it would have gotten really confusing had I used commas everywhere. I would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commas. So instead, I provided clarification by splitting up my list with semicolons, the one here and the one here, because my items, London, England, Dublin, Ireland, and Honolulu, Hawaii, already had commas in them. Finally, I overslept, semicolon, consequently I was late to school. And that's that third rule, where you use a semicolon before an adverb, all right, to split up two independent clauses. Let's look over here and see if you can place the semicolons in the right spot. So we've got the sentence, the participants came from Chicago, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, and Savannah, Georgia. So we know we're missing some commas here. So missing an S here too, let's add that in. Participants came from Chicago, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, and Savannah, Georgia. Those are just conventional comma uses. Now if we threw commas here to separate Chicago, Illinois from Dallas, Texas, and then another comma here to separate Dallas, Texas from Savannah, Georgia, that looks a little messy and confusing. It's hard to see where the items in the list actually are. So instead of using those commas, because we already have commas in the items, let's go ahead and change those to semicolons. So they came from Chicago, Illinois, semicolon, Dallas, Texas, semicolon, and Savannah, Georgia. So now it's really clear where the items in the list are. And then finally, my favorite book is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I also love jazz. So I've got two really closely related sentences here. If I was grading this sentence though, I would write a big fat RO next to it. It's a run-on sentence. You've got two independent clauses that are fused and there's nothing to fuse them together. Because they're so closely related, they're both talking about books by Toni Morrison that this person happened to like, you can throw in a semicolon there. Now you've got a compound sentence, not necessarily one that's a run-on sentence. So this should help you with that semicolon use. Think wisely and make sure that where you use it, things are closely related.